Good evening. Can you hear me? Okay, thanks. Good evening and welcome to tonight's public hearing of the 2019 New York City Charter Revision Commission. I'm Gail Benjamin, the chair of the commission, and I am joined by the following commission members. Allison Hirsch on my right. On my left, Jim Karras, Ed Cordero, and Reverend Clinton Miller. David Seitzer is my counsel, who will be helping me keep track of how the meeting is going and what I'm supposed to do. Tonight, we kick off our second round of public hearings throughout the 5 boroughs in order to solicit feedback from the public on proposals the Commission is considering for changes to the New York City Charter. As I have emphasized throughout our public meetings, as the city's foundational governing document, the Charter plays a vitally important role in establishing the structures and processes of city government, which in turn affect many aspects of our everyday lives. It has been our task to evaluate how the current charter is performing since it was largely put into place in 1989, and to identify areas in which improvements may be made in order to best serve the city for the next 30 years. At our first round of borough hearings in September, as well as through engagement online and in person, we received hundreds of suggestions for changes to the charter. The Commission ultimately adopted a set of focus areas which outlined those ideas which we decided to pursue further, and then held a series of expert forums at which we were able to hear from a wide variety of people knowledgeable in those areas. Following that months-long process, the Commission staff issued a preliminary staff report containing its recommendations regarding those proposals which they feel merit further consideration for presentation to the voters on the ballot in November of 2019. As I said, that is, they merit further consideration. They are not endorsed by the Commission, nor has the Commission taken any particular view of the ideas that you might see in the staff report. But that report is what brings us here today. We look forward to hearing your comments about any recommendations in the report that you support or oppose, or ideas you may have for how best to craft any particular proposal. We're joined by Commissioner Sal Albanese and Commissioner Stephen Fiella. Following testimony from the public, we will have some time for the commissioners to discuss with each other the ideas and recommendations that have been raised. We will begin the public testimony shortly. If you wish to testify and have not yet done so, please fill out a speaker's slip and submit it to our staff. We're happy to accept any written testimony you may have. We would appreciate your limiting your testimony to the recommendations that are in the report, and you can get the report if you don't have it. It is online on our website and available to you. We will limit your testimony to 3 minutes per individual in order to ensure that we can hear from everyone who wishes to speak. After you testify, members of the Commission may have questions for you to follow up on the ideas that you've presented, so bear with us. The first panel is Stephen R. Nelson. If you would come up to the table here. Jack Noland, Marvin G. Bernard, and Alan Leidner. And Mr. Nelson, whenever you're ready, you may start. The microphone, is that on? Yes, it should be. It's not on. His, not mine. Try it now.
Try turning it on. Is there a switch?
Oh,
No.
Yes.
it's on? Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Good evening. My name is Stephen Nelson. I am a long-term New York City resident. My testimony relates to elections and redistricting. Hold on.
You can take it out of the cradle if you prefer to hold it.
That's okay. Can you hear me like that?
Yes.
Great, okay. My testimony relates to elections and redistricting, and I'm testifying in support of ranked choice voting. I support ranked choice voting for all the reasons that have been offered in support of it throughout the process of the 2019 New York City Charter Revision Commission, and that's in my written testimony. Instead than repeating that in my spoken comments, I wish to focus on the benefits of ranked choice voting to voters that I believe has not received sufficient attention. Ranked choice voting empowers voters to believe that their votes count. It enhances their vote counts. It enhances voter confidence in our electoral process. It permits voters both to vote for their favorite candidate and to be involved in electing the ultimate election winner. It shifts a voter's attention from electability of candidates to the candidate's policy positions. With ranked choice voting, voters do not have to agonize over the dilemma that voting for their preferred candidate might be a wasted protest vote. Even worse, voters may be dissuaded from voting for their preferred candidate out of concern that doing so might split the vote between candidates with generally similar policy positions and actually help a candidate they oppose to be elected. Finally, ranked choice voting enables voters to send a voting message that can influence other candidates either in a subsequent general election or in future year primaries and elections. Although many of these aims are furthered by fusion voting, rank order voting is a more precise and expansive approach. To address the specific questions the staff has solicited public comment on, A, ranked choice voting should be used in all New York City elections, primary, special, and general elections. Ranked choice voting has many benefits, and there is no reason to limit it to less than all elections. At a minimum, ranked choice voting should be used for all primary and special elections. B, similar to the types of elections above, ranked choice voting should be used for elections for all offices. C, ranked choice voting should be implemented immediately without a phase-in period and at a minimum for the 2021 elections when, in addition to wide-open mayoral and controller races, there will be open primaries for borough presidents and many city council seats. D, ranked choice voting should be used exclusively and not a hybrid RCV runoff system. By definition, ranked choice voting will produce a majority winner. E, ranked choice voting should permit voters to rank order their preferences for all candidates in an election. A ballot with all candidates' names and ranking bubbles that you check or indicate your preference is easier for voters to fill out at the voting booth. All the names and all the ranks will be on it. Voters will feel more empowered if they can rank order as many of the candidates as they choose. If they don't rank order all candidates, potentially resulting in their vote being exhausted, that's their choice. If the number of candidates a voter is allowed to rank is limited, say to 3 or even 5 candidates, voters may well feel that this is arbitrary and manipulative. They may become frustrated and they may lose confidence in our electoral system. If the commission determines that there are compelling administrability concerns or a risk that rank ordering too many candidates might result in voter confusion, at a minimum, rank order voting should be permitted for a minimum of 10 candidates if there are 10 or more candidates for any elected office. In conclusion, I urge the commission to adopt the broadest possible ranked choice voting approach to submit to voters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nelson. Are there questions for Mr. Nelson? I actually have a question for you, if you don't mind. One of the concerns is that of ballot exhaustion is that you could end up in a situation if there, let's say in the last public advocate race, when there are 17 candidates, that a candidate could be elected who was actually with a minority, a significant minority of votes. How would you think that should be addressed?
Well, in terms of exhaustion, like in San Francisco, there was exhaustion because there was only 3 choices permitted to rank. So if you rank everybody, then you can't have exhaustion because your vote always counts. And that's the most important thing to me, is that a vote always counts. And that's why you shouldn't limit the number of rank orderings, in my opinion. And there's always a majority, so by definition, any candidate that wins did get a majority.
And how are you, on what are you basing that?
Well, you know, if...
It could be a plurality.
Well, again, in terms of the votes that are actually counted, there always is a majority. If somebody rank orders fewer than they are able to, their vote could be exhausted, and there could be some small portion of votes that aren't counted in the final majority count. But that percentage has been in single digits in almost every election that I'm aware of that's been looked at in the United States. You know, less than 10% has been exhausted in all the elections that I've seen data on. And the number of voters that don't show up in runoffs or, you know, don't necessarily come vote is very significant in general plurality elections. So I think this does improve voter participation and voter counts that actually contribute to the final result.
Okay, thank you. Allison?
I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much. You know, one of the critiques of ranked choice voting that I've heard recently is that it has the possibility to disenfranchise unduly benefit highly educated voters who have access to information, and negatively impact particularly lower income communities of color who may not have access to the same level of detail around who all the candidates are and what their platforms are, and so aren't able to rank all 10, 15 candidates. And I was wondering if you can speak to that issue at all, or that concern.
Sure. Yeah, I think the research from Ranked Choice Voting Research Center and Fair Vote and other organizations is that ranked choice voting increases representation of non-majority groups and candidates. And I'm not sure I understood the rest of your question, but I think the essential issue when it comes to questions of confusion is, rather than structurally limiting voters' opportunity to participate, let's say by limiting the number of choices that you give them, I think the duty is on the government in setting up an election and educating people and providing information, and on the candidates to educate constituencies as to how it works. And when you look at Santa Fe or Maine, other places that have done this, they've got very good outreach methods, with sample ballot cards and things like that, that actually have improved voter comprehension significantly. And I think the data shows that participation in the elections has increased.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Nelson. And now we have Mr. Noland.
That's right.
Could I just ask, if I may take a minute, one, I'd like to recognize Commissioners Camillo, Gavin, and Vaca have joined us. But I would also like to ask, if you are someone who has a phone, if you could put it on airport mode or vibrate or turn it off, that would really be helpful. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jack Noland. I'm a policy researcher at Represent Us, the nation's largest nonpartisan grassroots anti-corruption organization. I'm also a member of Represent Us's volunteer New York chapter, which advocates for democracy reforms in our city and state. I live in Queens, and I want to thank all of you for hosting this hearing here and for recommending further consideration of implementing ranked choice voting in New York City elections. The issues with our elections are well documented, and thank you to the Commission staff for their deep analysis. In primaries for citywide office, if no candidate garners 40% of the vote, there's a runoff between the top two finishers. But as the preliminary staff report notes, turnout tends to decline rapidly in these costly runoff elections, as in the 2013 Public Advocate Democratic runoff, where participation fell 61%. In our other elections, our first-past-the-post system allows winning candidates to emerge from a crowded field without the support of a majority of voters. The 2019 special election for public advocate, featuring a field of 17 candidates, was won with just 33% of the vote. And unfortunately, results like this aren't rare. An analysis by Common Cause New York found that over the last 3 election cycles, almost 64% of primaries with more than 2 candidates were won with less than a majority. Further, just under 30% of those races were decided by less than 40% of voters. And even worse, 7% saw winners receive less than 30% of the vote. With ranked choice voting, we can change that. RCV offers better representation of voters in the process, where we have more opportunities to express our true preferences without fear of without fear of accidentally helping candidates who we don't support, and better representation in the outcomes, since successful candidates have to go beyond their base and build broader coalitions to govern. And under RCV, we also enjoy more voices in our elections, as candidates no longer have to fear spoiling an election by entering the race and siphoning support from others they might agree with. This body has a rare opportunity to square the energy of our political moment with the way that we elect our city officials. Now is the time. In 2021, 70% of city council members, every borough president, the comptroller, and the mayor will be term limited out of office. We will likely and hopefully see robust fields of candidates running to replace them. By placing and passing RCV on the ballot this year, we will have time to implement the program thoughtfully and collaboratively with education for voters and candidates across the city. We don't have to pit representation against participation. We can give voters more choice, free candidates from the spoiler effect, and save the city money by eliminating runoff elections. I strongly urge the Commission to put ranked choice voting for New York City elections on the 2019 ballot, and I want to thank you all for your diligence and your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of Mr. Newland? Thank you. And the next speaker I have, I believe, is either Marvin Bernard or Alan Leidner.
It's Alan Leidner.
And is Marvin Bernard here? Okay, Mr. Leidner, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, commissioners, for hearing my testimony. My name is Alan Leidner. I'm a 35-year veteran of city service. I also served for 10 years working for Booz Allen Hamilton, working with the Department of Homeland Security and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I'm currently the president of GISMO, which is the city's GIS, or Geospatial Information Systems organization. And I'm also speaking on behalf of Jack Eichenbaum, who's a former president of GISMO and is the current Queensborough historian. So let me get my statement over with here. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the World Trade Center was destroyed. During the following hours and days, maps had to be created to guide rescue workers across the debris field. Aerial photography and sensor data had to be collected daily to understand what was happening on and under the pile. Inspections had to be carried out on all buildings south of Canal Street. Underground infrastructure damage needed to be assessed and repaired. Subsurface fires needed to be located and related to a buried tank of freon gas that could have released phosgene, or mustard gas, across lower Manhattan. Thousands of maps had to be created and distributed to the entire responsive community to give them situational awareness and a common operating picture. There was only one way to manage all these data products, through the use of geospatial information systems. And just a point of note, I was the director of the Emergency Mapping and Data Center during 9/11. What makes geospatial information systems so special? GIS extends information technology by taking the location characteristics found in almost every database and tying them to an accurate map point on the Earth. GIS can measure the distances between objects and performs dozens of other geographic analytics. In this way, GIS enables thousands of databases to be used together. Imagine data like a stack of pancakes, or like Lego pieces that fit together in any combination. GIS needs special attention to achieve accuracy, currency, and interoperability. However, New York City is now going through an extended period when its technology leaders have not fully grasped the importance of GIS and what needs to be done to maximize its benefits. Today, we have no citywide GIS officer. Collaboration between agencies is not encouraged, and we have no plan to take advantage of the latest spatial technologies and methods. We seem to have forgotten that GIS is an essential tool to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. Consequently, Gizmo, the city's GIS user group with more than 400 members, and I might add, we have a larger community of 3,000. We are leading an initiative in league with more than 30 other organizations and institutions to add provisions into the city charter to permanently provide for proper management of GIS. We aim to bring standards of GIS governance to the level of best practices found in cities across the U.S. and around the world. Quickly, I'll just go through the points, focusing on...
The little annoying sound you heard
I know that was my
your
time.
3 minutes.
But I've got 20 seconds and I can be
You got
through.
20 seconds.
Okay, focusing on Chapter 48 of the City Charter, which covers Do It, we propose the appointment of a Deputy Commissioner to serve as the city's Chief Geospatial Information Officer, the establishment of a GIS steering committee made up of agency GIS leaders and other experts, a requirement that the city produce and maintain a GIS strategic plan, a requirement that the spatial data found in almost all city open data sets be standardized to promote interoperability and ease of use, and the creation of an underground infrastructure committee made up of representatives from city agencies and private utilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there questions? The only thing that I would say is I think that this could actually be done by legislation, by the City Council. I don't believe that it would require a charter revision, but we will certainly ask staff about that. Sal?
I'm very interested. Admittedly, I don't know much about it, but it seems like it's something that we should certainly consider. My question is, why didn't you come forward earlier on this? Because
We just learned about this, I'm afraid to say.
you mean the charter
About the
itself?
charter revision. We have our heads in maps most of the time, so
'Cause
we didn't look up.
Because I think this very technical
Yeah.
issue could probably use some expert testimony with some maps and some video to really drill down on what this is about. But I think it's very interesting and certainly something that should be considered. I don't know at this late stage, because we haven't had any real education about it, Madam Chair.
This is the first I've heard about it. If Lisette has any additional knowledge, we're happy to glean from her. But if not, it is my first.
I would say that we have sat down with Gail Brewer's staff and also with Councilman Levin in Brooklyn. We are thinking about
Legislation?
Legislation,
Okay.
but this might be a way as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Any, Councilmember Fiella?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Nelson, and Jack, forgive me, I'm having a hard time hearing, and I don't have testimony for you. Your last name is it Dillon or
Noland.
Nolan? Well, that doesn't sound like Dylan at all. So my question is for both Mr. Nelson and Mr. Nolan. You both seem to support ranked choice voting. Mr. Nelson, in your testimony, you say that it empowers voters to believe that their votes count. You concede that, and this is a question, so if you don't agree, you'll disagree with me, I hope. It empowers voters who would be eligible to vote in that election or that primary, right? In New York City, there are probably 1 million voters who, for all intents and purposes, are closed out of the decisive round of voting, right? That if you can't vote in a Democratic primary, in the decisive round in most elections in New York City, you don't really have a decisive voice, do you?
You seem because of the predominance of the Democratic Party?
Right. So what I'm saying is ranked choice voting, in your estimation, a really bold move for this city, or is it just a move that is important, it's efficient, I happen to agree with it, but it's not bold, that it still disenfranchises roughly 1 million people who aren't registered of a particular party from voting, right? Do your organizations hold any positions on nonpartisan elections or open primaries? Would that be a bold move for the city of New York?
That's a lot. Thank you. So first of all, I'm not part of any organization, so I'm a citizen. I'm speaking for myself. These are my opinions. I think it's both bold and efficient. So I say yes to both of those. I think it's efficient because it improves the system. I think it's bold because it changes the dynamic. I think that our country and New York City citizens, residents, as far as I can tell, are losing confidence in the two-party system. And I think that this can give people more sense of empowerment. If more parties run and you can express your view for another party without having it be a protest vote, then that can influence the major party. And so I think it actually does dramatically change the dynamic, and I think it does it better than fusion voting, because instead of having a candidate that sort of somehow kind of gets a green vote or something like that, even though they're a Democrat, here you could actually vote for a candidate that's legitimately within the party that represents a minority view, and have as your second choice, let's say, a Democrat versus a Republican, or a Republican versus a Democrat. So I think it actually does give voters a sense of empowerment to actually express their views. And if a Democrat party, let's say a candidate who succeeds, looks and says, oh, there's like 10 or 15 or 20 or 25% trending up towards another view, let's say it's any particular political view you might have, and this candidates in this minority area keep getting more and more votes, I better pay attention. Finally, if you wanted to take the more dramatic step, which I think is probably not politically feasible right now, but personally I would support long-term, is to get rid of parties altogether, not have Democrat primaries and then just have one candidate at the end, but have some sort of threshold that allows candidates to get in. So I might have, a Republican be my first choice, a Green be my second choice, and a Democrat be my third choice, and then a different Republican be my fourth choice. So I think that it allows voters to, ultimately, if you went that far, and I don't think we could get there today, so this is a very important first step that sets the stage for maybe more dramatic changes down the road. It actually does re-empower in that sense. As you said, I don't think they're disenfranchised, but if there's people who vote Republican, they are voting, and this actually gives more active voices and nuanced, precise information to the elected officials and to the rest of the populace. So I think it's both bold and more efficient.
Mr. Nolan.
Yes, Councilmember, thank you for your question. If I understand it correctly, I would take a similar tack in that I do believe that ranked choice voting is a bold reform. I don't think it addresses necessarily the closed party or primary system in New York, but it doesn't intend to, or it doesn't set out to. And I think that that's not necessarily something that should be held against it, but I would agree that ranked choice voting does allow better representation of voters throughout the process. And so if there was an open primary reform in the future, we would have a better sense of the candidates who are supported by voters across the city throughout that system, but not in this system, though. Does that answer your question?
You're both very articulate.
So, just to follow up on Commissioner Fiala, so you both endorse open primaries. I mean, rank order voting, which I agree with Commissioner Fiala, is a step forward, but I think it's a tiny step. And hopefully a forerunner to opening up the process so, a million or so other voters can participate. We saw what happened to poor Bernie Sanders in the election in New York a while ago. So would you both endorse open primaries?
So Represent Us has endorsed open primaries in the past. We've not taken a position in New York City. It's not something that we've studied, but it is something that we can look into further.
Well, why would it be different in New York City?
There are sort of variances within every primary system that we'd have to. I can't personally give you an endorsement on that issue, but it is something that we have endorsed in other places in the past.
Thank you for asking the question. Again, I'm not part of an organization. I'm speaking for myself as a citizen. I have not looked at the issue of open versus closed primaries, so I'm not going to express a view. So no, you cannot say that that's my view. I don't know in terms of open versus closed versus getting some sort of eligibility standard to get onto a general election ballot and then not having primaries would be a better approach. But again, it's not something I've given a lot of thought to. But I thought this was an important thing that should be supported in New York and then elsewhere in the country.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the panel. The next panel is Daniela Liebling, Eric Kober, Thomas Hillgardner, and Luis Tejada. We'll start with Ms. Liebling.
Hi, and thanks for having us here today, and thanks for all the work you've done so far. I really, honest to God, tried to make this 3 minutes. I really did. I will do my best. And I just have to say that I ditto everything the other two ranked choice voting advocates said. So my name is Daniela Liebling, and I'm here tonight as a New Yorker and a member of the Green Party to call for ranked choice voting to be instituted in all New York City elections, not only for primaries and special elections, but most importantly for general elections. The Green Party has been fighting for ranked choice voting for many years. We know all too well how broken and corrupt our electoral system and political system have become, because time and time again we have been the victims of an undemocratic system that routinely and intentionally keeps our voices out of debates and off the media airwaves, while at the same time it allows wealthy and powerful donors and corporations to engage in the legal bribery of our elected officials. Polls show that more and more Americans strongly disapprove of our current electoral system and of the job our elected officials are doing. At the same time, voters agree with many of the issues that the Green Party has been fighting for. I can't list them all here due to time, but for those who may not know, the Green Party is the party that pioneered, wrote, and campaigned on the Green New Deal in 2010 that you've been hearing so much about lately, when our candidate Howie Hawkins ran for governor here in New York. We are also the only party that never takes any corporate donations whatsoever. When I am campaigning out in the streets for my candidates, I often encounter voters who love all the issues we stand for, but they say they can't or won't vote for our candidates because they're too worried about splitting the vote. So voters want to vote for our candidates, but because of our corrupt winner-take-all undemocratic system, they can't vote their conscience. That is not democracy. I understand that some groups present tonight feel that it is too confusing or difficult for ranked choice voting to be implemented in the general elections due to our current fusion system. We could not disagree more with that view. In order to truly level the playing field and make a major impact on our democracy, ranked choice voting must also be used for general elections. If we limit the use of ranked choice voting to primaries and special elections, we will only be improving elections for Democrats and Republicans who already have all the power, money, and influence. So let's use all the potential power that RCV has to actually cure our diseased electoral and political system. There are clear options for how candidates can be listed on the ballot in a general election that is not confusing. For example, in the 1930s, New York City had a proportional form of RCV. They got rid of it, unfortunately. Each candidate was listed only once with their party endorsements under the same name, under their name. Another option for voters who are used to voting by party affiliation is that each party would be listed with their endorsed candidate and allow the voter to rank their choice. A voter selects candidate X on party line A as their first choice, candidate X on party line B as their next choice, candidate Y on party line C as their third choice, and so on. Voters are already used to voting by party line when candidates appear on multiple lines. If voter confusion is the concern, there is a much bigger problem with having voters change from RCV voting in a primary to a plurality vote in a general election. In addition, changing software modalities between a primary and a general election opens the BOE up for potential voting machine fiascos, and we know they're capable of that. We thank the commissioners who put this issue on the agenda, and we thank all the groups who have been advocating for ranked choice voting. Please now do what must be done to make a seismic shift in our democracy so that we can stop climate change and ensure a future for our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Liebling. Are there questions? Okay.
I have a question. Does-
Sal?
Did the Green Party take a position on democracy vouchers?
We haven't specifically taken a position. I know some people in our party are interested in that and have advocated for that within the party, but as a party, we haven't taken a position.
Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Kober is next.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Eric Kober. I am the former Director of Housing, Economic, and Infrastructure Planning for the New York City Department of City Planning, now retired and a visiting scholar at the Wagner School of Public Service at NYU. I am, however, speaking tonight as a private citizen. I've written for the City Journal website 2 op-ed articles about the work of this commission. The first raised an alarm about the charter revision proposals advanced in January by the City Council, which I saw as an all-out assault on the mayor's authority. The second, published yesterday, cautiously praises the preliminary staff report, which generally adheres to the good government standards established by the 1989 Charter Revision Commission. This conservatism of process is welcome and a credit to the Commission's leadership. Nonetheless, the staff report also includes proposals that could impede, not improve, governmental operations. For example, the report proposes that the Council approve the appointment of the Corporation Counsel, who would also serve an unspecified term. This change, the report asserts, would insulate the Corporation Counsel from undue influence by the mayor, preserving the independence of the position. But really, the opposite is true, because the proposal would enable the City Council to exert pressure on a Corporation Counsel nominee to dismiss advice from the law department staff and potentially work against the city's best interests. The report also recommends giving the public advocate some means to compel agencies and officials to provide information, quote, whether that mechanism be some form of subpoena power or otherwise, unquote. Since the public advocate has no specific responsibilities or authority, his staff could be empowered to draw up an unlimited number of wide-ranging requests. One can imagine such a mechanism becoming a costly and time-consuming distraction for agencies that have real administrative responsibilities. Regarding land use, the report recommends that community boards and borough presidents be permitted to comment on land use applications before the start of the formal ULURP process. The report implies that a pre-ULURP comment period specified in the charter would be more influential than the current practice of informal consultation. However, such a provision raises the question of what the Department of City Planning and the City Planning Commission are expected to do with these official pre-ULURP comments. Private applicants will still choose what to submit for Planning Commission approval. They are not obliged to make changes in response to comments. ULURP kicks off when the application is complete, not when the planners support it. The Planning Commission votes to approve, reject, or modify the application only after it hears from the community board and borough president again during the designated review periods. I applaud the report's idea of rationalizing the various planning requirements of the charter, but note that there are no penalties for disregarding charter planning requirements. Thus, the charter can, at best, give a nudge toward good planning, not mandate it. Any planning provisions in the charter should be high level and provide the flexibility to adapt to specific times and conditions. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Eric. Are there any questions for Mr. Kober? Steve?
Director Colbert, thank you for being here. Am I correct that ULURP is at its core tantamount to certainty in the development process in the city of New York? It injects a degree of certainty into a process. Everybody knows what the rules are. Is that an accurate description of what ULURP is? An injection of certainty of process into our vision for development in this city?
Once the application has been certified.
the process, the ULURP process?
Well, I think it has two functions. I think, if you go back and look at the sort of documentation from the 1975 Charter Commission that created it, first of all, it creates certainty as to when the process begins and ends, which was seen at that time as being a major step forward. The other thing that it does is by having multiple public hearings at different levels of government, it creates legitimacy, which is very important, that people had several chances to be heard, and that a record was established in which their voices were heard and a sort of considered decision was achieved. And I think those are really the sort of two purposes of the ULURP process.
So if certainty and legitimacy are the big themes of ULURP in this city, what does amending the charter to permit for a pre-application discussion do to, does it impede, does it improve governmental operations?
My view, it creates confusion as to what's supposed to happen. Let's say that the charter is amended so that there is a 30-day pre-ULURP period. So that would require, I think, I'm just sort of thinking aloud, that the Department of City Planning would be required to issue a list of intended certifications 30 days in advance, and that the community boards and borough presidents would get presentations by the applicant, and they would have the opportunity to comment. But what should be done with that comment? The application would be certified even if the applicant makes no changes, since it's the applicant's submission. And assuming it's complete, it would be certified. The community board and the borough president would then get the application, they would comment again, and only then would the City Planning Commission be in a procedural position to amend the application or turn it down, and then the council would be in a position to do the same. So it just doesn't seem to me to make sense in the context of the way the process is structured to have this pre-ULURP comment period, because it can't be acted upon.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Commissioner Vaca?
Thank you, Mr. Kober. Thank you for your testimony. Several questions. You speak about the public advocate and your concern. One of the staff recommendations, which we have yet to discuss on this commission, the staff recommended that we consider giving the public advocate subpoena powers. You don't seem to be in favor of that.
I'm not, because I think that is potentially dangerous. I'll give you one example. There was a candidate for public advocate several cycles ago who didn't win, but his sort of campaign theme in the primary was that he was going to sue the city over land use decisions that had been approved by the Planning Commission and the City Council. And his thinking was that, we just talked a little bit about legitimacy, but his thinking was that merely being approved by the Planning Commission and the Council did not confer legitimacy unless he also agreed with it. And the public ultimately in the primary did not go for that argument. But let's imagine that a person like that got elected public advocate. You could imagine an endless barrage of requests for information to the Department of City Planning, which I'm very familiar with, having worked there for a number of years, and it could be a major impediment to operations. And I don't think it would serve any beneficial public purpose.
Thank you. I wanted your view. I also am opposed to the subpoena power for the public advocate, and I have voiced my opinion on that. I know that there are many who want to give the public advocate something formal to do, but I do not think this is what I would do with the public advocate's office. And I know that subpoena power now rests in the City Council. It rests with people who audit. It rests with the law enforcement agencies. The public advocate is not an executive, and the public advocate is not part of is not a leader of a legislative body. So in both cases, I don't see subpoena power as being constructive. I want to ask you two more questions.
Sure.
Okay, just,
One more question? Am I talking too much?
well, we have other people who
Okay.
do have
Well,
questions.
I want to
too.
ask some questions too. Thank you. Let me ask you about environmental assessment statements, EASs. I want to get to this. I had requested that we consider here that as of right construction, once it reaches certain thresholds, be included as part of a requirement that an EAS statement be produced. Local neighborhoods often complain that even if it's as of right, the impact on transportation, on infrastructure, on gentrification, all of these impacts are not studied once the as of right designation is achieved. So I wanted to know how you felt about that. Should we have at least an EAS statement required once certain thresholds are reached when it comes to residential or commercial development that is as of right?
I think my response would be similar to my response to the pre-Euler suggestion, which is that in the situation where you're talking about where there's an as-of-right development, there's no decision maker who would receive an EAS and do something in response to it. Sort of the basis of the environmental review process is that the decision makers have all the information that they need to make an informed decision. Where there is no decision maker in an as-of-right situation, what you're really asking for is planning. You're asking for the appropriate agencies, given the specific impacts of concern, to study them and take action. And this I think is something that can be that should be negotiated through the oversight process that the City Council exerts over all city agencies, and council members can request that particular issues be studied. The amount of study that takes place is going to obviously be limited by time and resources, but that is also an issue with EASs because resources would have to be expended.
It's a question of resources, but I
yeah.
think it's the right thing to do. The last thing is that you work for the Planning Commission. I wanted to ask you, I had proposed that the community boards be included in pre-ULURP discussions that take place before items are certified. Community boards and borough presidents. There are multi-agency meetings that take place before an item is certified. And at those multi-agency meetings that are planning meetings and scoping meetings that take place before certification goes to the borough president and the community boards, those two city agencies are not represented at those meetings. So if we're talking about community engagement, I thought it should begin there. How do you feel on that?
I think that any such process would have to be sort of carefully calibrated. There are often, for complex applications, there are many meetings that take place between applicants and city staff. I don't think it would be practical to have community boards represented at every one of those meetings. So
No.
I think it would have to be
I agree
very carefully calibrated to identify steps in the process that might be appropriate for the presence of community boards.
I would like to request that staff go back and review that recommendation that I made again, and that the staff calibrate a process whereby community boards and borough presidents are involved in those meetings. I do agree with you. There has to be a specificity, but I do think that we have an opportunity here, and I'd like the staff to review that. Thank you.
Jim, and then Sal. Oh, I'm sorry. That's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Kober. I wanted to ask a question about your position on the Corporation Council. It seems to me that your position sort of presumes that the mayor is the holder of the city's best interest. Unlike an administrative department head, like the commissioner of the Department of Consumer Affairs or the commissioner of social services. The corporation counsel is the lawyer for for the city and for every independently elected city official. I think New York's the only major city that either does not have an elected city attorney or at a minimum advice and consent or some kind of check on the process. What would you think of advice and consent for the law department? Why would that somehow weaken the corporation counsel's adherence to the best interests of the city?
I think it has the potential to do that, depending on how the council handles advice and consent, and whether and I think the imposition of a term on top of that in particular creates a sort of a level of influence, an additional level of influence over the corporation counsel. I would say I worked for the city for 38 years. I never saw a corporation counsel take a legal position that was not based on the considered professional expertise of the law department staff. And I would be concerned that the council, if it had advice and consent powers, and particularly if it had the ability to set a term, or the charter set a term, that situations would sort of unfold in which the council pressured the corporation counsel to take positions that were not supported by the professional experts in the law department and were not in the best interest of the city.
You didn't think there was a tinge maybe of politics involved in the Giuliani administration decision to take support away from the Brooklyn Museum because Mayor Giuliani didn't like a painting when the law department supported that? Virtually all the other city officials opposed it, the First Amendment.
I don't think that specific incident is, in the 30 years that the 89 charter has been in effect, I don't think that specific incident is the case that would demand an amendment to the charter.
Mr. Kober, given your background, what is your view of a charter amendment that would mandate that the city promulgate a comprehensive plan involving infrastructure, zoning, and all of the essentials that a real city needs?
Well, a couple things. First of all, the charter had a requirement for a master plan for 49 years, from 1936 until 1975. The city never actually produced a master plan. It produced in 1969 a draft master plan, and those volumes still exist in libraries. It transpired when the city tried to produce a master plan that it was very difficult to get to any level of, sort of beyond really a description of what was, rather than any actual sort of vision of a future, just because there wasn't time and money to do it, and public consensus. I think that, so that's one sort of observation. Another observation I would have is that in New York City as a whole, under any sort of planning scenario that one could think of, the vast majority of the city's land area is not going to change over any reasonable time frame. Most of the city looks exactly the way it looked 20 years ago. And that is, because it was built out, it has been generally well maintained, the zoning is relatively adapted to whatever currently exists, and no one is proposing to change it. So comprehensiveness is also something that we have to be a little cautious about. What the city needs is, and has very great difficulty accommodating, is to develop a consensus on the amount, type, and location of growth that is going to take place somewhere, though not in most places in New York City, over the next decade or two. And to the extent that the charter can, and this is why I said in my remarks that any mandate that is embedded in the charter should be a high-level mandate, and it should be addressing that very issue, which is that it is beneficial as a nudge for the charter to require that the Department of City Planning identify in a broad sense the areas of the city in which growth should take place and the amount and type of growth that needs to take place over a reasonable time frame, which is really not more than 10 to 20 years. That is useful. To say that we should go beyond that and have a comprehensive plan for every neighborhood is not realistic because the resources will never be available, and it's not really necessary because most neighborhoods are not going to change over the foreseeable future.
But aren't there macro, we're not talking about, at least I'm not, that micro issues impacting local neighborhoods. What I'm addressing is the macro issues, sustainability, the fact that climate change is going to be a major factor going forward in this town. The fact that, we're a major city where our infrastructure is still below par, our subway system needs a huge amount of work. And don't we need some sort of a guide, some sort of a benchmark that on the macro side, whether it be housing, transportation, sustainability, that should be used as a guidepost for the city going forward? I assume other major cities of the world have these kinds of plans that are obviously upgraded on a regular basis, updated and what have you.
Well, there's an intergovernmental issue with transit, obviously, which makes it very difficult for the city to address transit without the sort of participation of the MTA.
I understand all that, but
yeah, but in terms of the city has a planning agency which I worked for almost 40 years, and the planning agency has a limited staff. Okay.
Okay.
So it needs to focus on critical issues that confront the city. If you ask for sort of more than that, then you have to sort of confront the sort of budgetary contingencies, which is that the city has a certain amount of capacity to do long-term planning, and
that's why
no more.
But that's why we're here. I mean,
Yeah.
If we propose an amendment for a comprehensive plan, that would mandate that the city provide the resources, whether it be at city planning or somewhere else, that we have a macro view of what needs to be done in this town over the next 30, 40, 50 years.
Well, yeah, I'll tell an anecdote which might give you an idea that maybe that's not true. In the 1989 charter, the city planning department was made sort of co-equal with OMB in the preparation of the 10-year capital strategy, and it would have been fiscal 90. It was the first year of the Dinkins administration. Several positions were added to the Department of City Planning's budget in order to implement that mandate, whereupon the city went into a budgetary crisis. There was a recession. The positions were yanked before anybody was hired. So I happened to have been the division director who got those positions. So I ended up with a charter requirement that we be co-equal, we, the Department of City Planning, be co-equal with OMB in the preparation of the 10-year capital strategy, and no staff. And I had for many years after that the mandate to be co-equal, and I had no staff.
Well, that's mismanagement. I don't know who's, I mean, it's incompetence. I'm not,
Yeah,
I can't address that. I mean, you know.
Sal?
you know-
I think Mr. Kober has addressed the question.
Proceed, Madam Chair.
Are there any other questions from Mr. Kober? Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Thomas Hillgardner. Slide it in. No?
Yes. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry about that. My name's Thomas Hillgardner. I'm with the New York Greens. I'm here today. I want to thank the commission for being here. I only recently became aware of your work. I actually haven't even read your full report. I've had a moment today to look over some of the bullet points here in the handouts, and I'm here today to talk about ranked choice voting. This is why I came here. I got an email less than 48 hours ago learning about this, and I've no prepared remarks. But this issue is so important to me, and I think it's such an important issue, and it's all about democracy, that I came down here and just said, I'm going to give you my 2 cents extemporaneously and about ranked choice voting. And I'm going to write you a statement, and you're going to have it in the next couple of weeks.
That's great.
But ranked choice voting, in fact, I don't know anybody who, when they really get informed, supports winner take all. It really doesn't have a lot to commend to itself. Ranked choice voting, looking at your issues here, it saves money. Sure, you know, it's going to save you money on the runoff elections. I think the low turnout is something that you ought to be concerned of. It's terrible for democracy when elections are decided when 8% of the people show up. That's just horrendous. So that's a really important issue. I think you take the money that you save on the elections and you throw that at an even more robust campaign finance system. But the most important thing I think about ranked choice voting is how people feel about their votes in a ranked choice voting system. People vote their hopes, not their fears. In a winner-take-all system, you vote on, oh my God, that guy's gonna win if I don't vote for this other creep. And you end up choosing between the lesser of two evils, and you don't vote for what you want, for what's in your heart, for what you really believe out of fear. And I think people would feel better about their votes if they had a system where when you vote, it's about what you believe in. And even if your candidate doesn't win, and I'm a two-time unsuccessful candidate for public office, never run for city office. I've never seen, I've run for a state office, statewide office, I ran for federal office. But I think that this is a bold move because New York City is a world-class city. And when New York City does something, lots of people follow. And ranked choice voting is something that should be sweeping this country. And I really, or as Mr. Nelson said, he said, I urge you to adopt the broadest type of ranked choice voting that you possibly can, including in the general election. And I want to reiterate what was also said about confusion. If you move from one system to another in 20 seconds, if you move from one system to another, you're going to confuse the voters. I think you want to adopt a system and get people used to it, and that's the best way to deal with the confusion issue, is to just go full bore for a system that's going to work in every election. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hillgardner. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Hillgardner, for your testimony. Let me concede, let me back up. You and the previous panel, you've convinced me it's a bold move. And this city deserves bold moves, as you just referenced. This city presently, since you brought up the issue of certainty in elections, this city, for a number of decades has operated in a bipolar fashion with respect to elections, hasn't it? We have, in certain elections, the standardized election, and then we have in other elections, we call them special elections, nonpartisan elections. We've already got multiple systems. And I should have asked you this earlier, so feel free to jump in here. Is the nonpartisan system, in your views, as third-party leaders, beneficial to the city as a whole?
I'm not really prepared to speak to that issue today. I gotta bow out. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Ms. Liebling?
Yeah. In general, the Green Party is not a proponent of nonpartisan elections because...
Opponent or
and
proponent?
She said she's not an opponent.
Because
I'm having trouble
I'm
hearing.
sorry, maybe I'll speak closer to the mic. We are not necessarily in favor of nonpartisan elections in the Green Party because we believe that parties have principles, and we have principles, and we have an extremely detailed set of rules that we go by, set of principles that we go by, which other parties don't even have. We have a platform that is extremely detailed, and
So-
we don't believe, we believe that when you vote for someone, you should be expressing who you are, what you believe with that vote. So we're not...
So ranked choice voting, in your view, in the party's view, would be the appropriate type of election reform that we should tackle?
Sorry, say that again?
Ranked choice. Yeah, I think there's a problem with it, right? You're having trouble, I'm having trouble. Ranked choice voting, in your view, would be the appropriate remedy to the existing election problem that's been identified in this city.
Correct.
That's the appropriate measure?
Correct. We
Thank
don't necessarily need nonpartisanship or nonpartisanness to get the democracy that we need. We need ranked choice voting, and we also need proportional representation, which we'll get to next time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there other questions? Okay, Mr. Tejada.
Hello, my name is Luis Tejada, and I am an organizer with the Campaign for an Elected Civilian Review Board and a mental health counselor here in the borough of Queens. I treat a specific group of vulnerable individuals that share a long history of unjust suffering at the hands of law enforcement. Few, if any, of their family members receive justice from our current police oversight administration and prosecutory platforms. Your staff's preliminary report is a discredit to the families that have lost a loved one at the hands of certain NYPD officers, to the dozens of attendees that have testified in support of meaningful police accountability, and to the thousands of individual claims that the ineffective Civilian Complaint Review Board has truncated throughout the years. We don't need to hand more oversight power to the police commissioner in regards to discipline. Neither do we need to have him produce more words to explain why he has the power to negate evidence and make his own decision on behalf of the NYPD. A majority of civilians demand that we need effective and unbiased governmental institutions that are impartial and that make decisions based on evidence and not on allegiance to special interests. Hopefully, you also agree that we need a major change to the city charter that restructures and provides full credibility to democratically elected board members with disciplinary empowerment without subjection to the police commissioner, and the addition of an elected special prosecutor that can prosecute officers accused of criminal acts. The Civilian Complaint Review Board cannot be fixed. Its mandates are legally powerless, and time again, their appointees show no courage to advocate for civilians they are supposed to serve with, quote, thoroughness and impartiality, fairness and independence, end quote. You have the power to do something about this crisis of public safety by adding our legislation to the ballot and providing civilians with the opportunity to vote for a respectable and autonomous new police oversight body this upcoming November. Good evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tejada. Are there questions? Thank you very much, and I thank the panel. The next panel will be Heather Miranda Jonathan Bailey, Frank Morano, and Joyce D. Hutton. Ms. Miranda, I believe you're first.
I want those 4 seconds back. Commissioners, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you for your time. I am a member of the Campaign for an Elected Civilian Review Board and a New York State citizen. As staff has addressed in their recommendations to you, we have a problem that needs to be solved. Unfortunately, none of their recommendations include the 3 changes our campaign deems necessary to fix the problem of unchecked police brutality. I have read the recommendations from staff in the preliminary report. Repeatedly, they suggest that you solicit feedback. So here I am with feedback. First of all, the Civilian Complaint Review Board must be elected so that its members cease to be in the pocket of the mayor, the city council, and the police commissioner. Let the people choose the board. Second of all, its conclusions must be binding so that citizens can regain a sense of trust in the police force. You can see this lack of trust for yourselves within our communities, and if you haven't seen it yet, I urge you to look with the eyes of a mother or a father whose children have historically been targeted by a system of unchecked power. Finally, give the board the ability to impose binding discipline, which cannot be waved away or flat out ignored by a biased police commissioner, and allow them to be equipped with an elected special prosecutor to perform unbiased prosecution of officers. Commissioners, you have the power and the responsibility to save lives. If an officer knows there will be real repercussions when they fire their weapon, the life saved will be in part saved by you. Please take that power seriously. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Ms. Miranda. Are there questions? Thank you. Mr. Bailey? Jonathan Bailey? I remember you from the last meeting.
Cool. I remember you too. Okay. Hey, my name is Jonathan Bailey. I am a member of the organizing committee of the Queens branch of the Democratic Socialists of America. I've been involved with various Queens electoral campaigns, including the campaign to elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. For me, as a young black man in America, it was the issue of police violence that brought me to being politically engaged. It's because of this that I'm here today to discuss the Charter Revision Commission's proposed changes for police discipline. As I'm sure you're all aware, you have chosen not to give New Yorkers the opportunity to vote for any of the things we have requested. You have seen our marches demanding police accountability, and we all sat together in City Hall and saw the entire room being filled with New Yorkers demanding an opportunity to vote for the elected Civilian Review Board. I know my wife and myself were a little bit rowdy, but I'm glad that you guys tolerated our rowdiness. There was no group in the room championing what the commission has instead put forward. There are 3 critical components to this legislation, which has been in your hands from the very beginning, that is being ignored. Those are, 1, that the members of the board be elected from the community districts. If we don't do this, if we don't allow for this, then essentially we have police dominion over the community. That's not right. 2, that disciplinary decisions be binding and not subject to being ignored or reduced or sidelined by the police commissioner. I saw in this handout today when I got here that it's clearly stated that that the police commissioner just explain why they deviate from the guidelines. The police commissioner just being able to explain why they're deviating from a decision, that's also not right. We can't have that. These decisions have to be binding, and they have to be decisions made by the community. Finally, 3, that there be an elected independent special prosecutor for all cases of criminal misconduct. If we don't do this, then essentially what you're doing is you're preserving a system of the police policing the police. It's entirely irrational to think that this constitutes accountability. For me as a citizen not paid by anyone to be here with no financial interests at hand, I expect the Charter Revision Commission to represent a process that allows us to democratically decide the proposals requested, that we request an opportunity to vote for. The validity of this process is predicated upon our ability to communicate the things that we as the public want to be able to vote for, and also on your ability to give the city an opportunity to vote for these things. Please give us the chance to vote for an elected civilian review board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bailey. Any questions? Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Bailey, and I'm sorry, Ms. Miranda, for your testimony. I've expressed my views that I think there does need to be more measures taken to make the CCRB stronger. I strongly believe, though, that at least 2 out of your 3 proposals would contravene state law, and that your arguments are better directed to the state legislature rather than to us. And what we've tried to do is come up with some proposals that could strengthen the CCRB within the box that we are able to work in. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I know that there's been a little bit of engagement around the legality of this, and I know our legal experts have communicated that indeed this is something that we can give New York City the opportunity to vote for. I think also if it represents something that's unconstitutional, I think that would be decided also in the courts, correct?
Yes, but we could not put something on the ballot that appeared to our analysis to have serious, legal problems.
The legislation was specifically crafted for New York, though, for New York state law. I know that there's some frustration from some people that feel that this issue of trying to debate around the legality of it is kind of is essentially a way to deflect us from really addressing the issues straight on. But I would encourage maybe more engagement with our legal experts.
Mr. Karras? Karras. I'd love to invite you or someone from your staff to a meeting to discuss this in greater detail, because obviously it's not something that we can fully hash out here, but I think that getting an answer to that question, I agree with Jonathan, but getting an answer to that question is important in our campaign.
Okay. Allison? Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Morano?
Thank you.
Seen you before, too?
Once or twice. Good evening, commissioners. And first, I want to commend not only you, but the staff in putting together a really impressive preliminary staff report, not only in terms of the diversity of issues covered, but I don't know that I've seen a commission staff report that was this devoid of both grammatical errors, factual errors, and typos. So clearly this staff was on its A game throughout every aspect of this process, and I think you and they are to be commended. There's so many different areas that you focused on in the staff report. I just am going to speak this evening with respect to ranked choice voting. I'll endeavor not to repeat too many of the things that the previous folks said, and I'd certainly be happy to answer any questions that you have. I am strongly in favor of ranked choice voting for all the reasons laid out in the staff report. So I want to do my best to give my 2 cents to address the aspects that the staff said that you guys were soliciting feedback on. The first, in terms of which types of elections should be subject to ranked choice voting, primary elections, special elections, or general elections. I really have to reiterate the suggestion from everybody that spoke previously that said it should really be all three, not only for consistency's sake, not only for simplicity's sake, but for common sense's sake. I mean, if the public and if you ultimately agree that ranked choice voting is beneficial, it surely should be beneficial for all the reasons cited in the staff report for all three of those types of elections. In terms of consistency's sake, we've seen that different elections here in New York City produce different outcomes. It's not unusual, and Commissioner Vaca knows this, having served in the City Council with a few people this happened to see someone elected in a nonpartisan special election only to lose their election in the partisan primary or general election that same year or a year later. Not only does having such a short tenured elected official, I know you're addressing the question of special election timing separately, but not only does having such a short tenured elected official mean that their entire tenure in government is solely about politics, but it's difficult to see the value to their constituents of not allowing them to at least get some seniority. And in terms of simplicity, it makes no sense for voters to learn one system for the primary, one system for special, and one system for a general, in my judgment. In terms of which offices should be subjected to RCV, in my view, all New York City elected offices should be, for all the same reasons. In terms of when implementation should begin, I think the best choice for you guys, in my judgment, is the 2021 elections. It's the next year in which every citywide election is up, and it gives enough time for the Board of Elections to prepare for any reforms to the ballot that need to be done. It gives enough time for the Board of Elections, the Commission, and candidates to do some outreach and messaging informing the public about the new system. And I'm just about done. So if you feel that a phase-in is necessary, then I would encourage you to phase it in for the citywide elections in 2021, mayor, public advocate, and controller, and for all the subsequent city council elections in 2023. But I don't believe that a phase-in is necessary. I really would discourage you from using a hybrid RCV and runoff system. It still saddles the taxpayer with the costs of a second election, and with 8-to-1 matching funds to go to 2 candidates for an additional round of voting really does very little in terms of managing that. In terms of how many candidates of voters should be able to rank on the ballot, I would suggest, I would agree with the previous testimony that you should be able to rank as many candidates as there are, or almost as many candidates as they are, and that will mitigate that issue we saw in San Francisco in that Board of Supervisors race of ballot exhaustion, because that usually only happens when you can rank 3 candidates or 4, and there are 10 or 11 candidates running. And we saw in the recent public advocate special election that's not exactly an alien concept. In terms of what type of tabulation should be used, I would encourage you to look at a system called STAR, which is an acronym for Score Then Automatic Runoff. When you compare that to the hypothetical instances of instant runoff voting that the commission staff laid out in the report, it's so much better in terms of honesty, equality, accuracy, simplicity, and expressiveness. So the STAR system would, in a nutshell, allow voters to score all the candidates, and then the 2 candidates with the highest score, whoever preferred more of those candidates, is the election. No need for a second runoff. Every voter gets to express their vote. It mitigates the need of strategic voting. So I would encourage you to look at that.
It doesn't bother you that one of those candidates may only have gotten 30% or 20% of the vote. They just happen to be in the right place, and they got the majority of votes for the last 2, but in the larger scheme of things, that a person who had only really received 20 or 30% of the votes cast is now the winner?
Well, that doesn't bother me nearly as much as the scenario that we see these days, where you have 70% of New Yorkers voting for someone else, and yet the person that was opposed by 70% of New Yorkers gets elected. But in
That
the
could still happen.
that is actually not even a hypothetical. That's exactly what happened in Burlington, Vermont in the 2009 mayor's race, when the person that won was not preferred by a majority of anybody. And Burlingtonites, I don't know the proper usage, they did away with it the next election. And that's why the star method, it would really, really reduce the likelihood of that ever happening. So I would encourage you to look at a star method, but don't get me wrong, any instant runoff voting method would be infinitely preferable to this winner-take-all system, the first past the post that we have now.
Thank you, Mr. Morano. Mr. Vaca? And then Mr. Fiella.
I have an open mind on the rank voting, but I wanted to ask you some questions. Let me ask, first of all, I was on a school board years ago, and rank voting or something similar to it took place. It was called proportional representation. Many voters were confused by that model. They didn't know if they should mark their first, second, third choice. Should they vote for everyone? Should they put an X or a circle rather than a number 1, 2, 3? And we had to go through an education process with voters. This was new to them. This was a little confusing to them. So we do want to maximize voter turnout. So, and engagement. Do you think that this will encounter similar problems and require a decision? And I was also concerned about your other remark that if we do it in 2021, it should be for the 3 citywide offices.
Only if you think a phase-in is necessary. Only if you, right.
Because I think that is the worst thing that we can do, is have people vote with rank voting for some people, and then for other people, don't rank vote, and I don't know how the Board of Elections would ever do that.
Completely agree. Again, I think the worst thing we could do is keep the system the way it is now. I would agree with you. The second worst thing we could do is having people need to go to the polls with a decoder ring to figure out how to vote in every type of election. In terms of the first part of your question, voter education and possibility of confusion, that's why, with respect to simplicity, the star system of tabulation is a much better one than traditional instant runoff voting. However, we had proportional representation in the city for 12 years to elect the city council at a time when there was far less technology than when the school board elections ended in 2003. And people were able to figure it out pretty easily because you had candidates with a vested interest in being able to tell the voters and needing to tell the voters how to vote. The problems with the school board elections, as I'm sure you know better than me, were manyfold. The biggest one was that the elections were May and the elections for everything else were in November. So you didn't have a whole lot of people coming out naturally to vote in the spring when they're usually voting in the fall. Another part of it was they had seemingly so little authority. They're wrestling with the Board of Education, they're wrestling with the superintendents, wrestling with politicians. So people felt like their vote didn't matter. I think a better comparison to the school board elections is the 2013 runoff for public advocate, where people knew it doesn't really matter who wins. It's essentially a useless office that we're paying $10 million to have an election for. If you look at the experiment with ranked choice voting in Minneapolis, voters, an overwhelming majority, from the first time they used it to the second time they used it, said they not only understood the system, but wanted to keep using the system in the future. And in city after city, when they've tried this, voters are able to understand it. Is a voter education campaign a good thing? Of course. Even in that controversial Vermont election that I alluded to, something like 90% of the voters, the first time they used ranked choice voting in 2006, said they understood the system and were able to use it effectively. Even in the controversial 2009 election, 3 years later, it was about 95% of voters. In only 3 years, that number have gone up to 95% that said they understood it, they felt like their vote counted, and they didn't have any problems with confusion.
Okay.
So, yes.
Thank you.
I just had one follow-up quickly, if you can answer me very quickly.
Certainly.
People do ask me, because with the school board election, it was all done on paper, and it took 2 weeks for people to know.
Uh,
One, so under the way you envision ranked choice voting, would the voters know that night who the new mayor was and who their new council person was?
In the overwhelming majority of cases, the answer is yes. When they had the school board elections, votes were not counted by optical scanners as they are now. So even though people would vote on paper, the optical scanners are able not only to tabulate the votes that night at the poll site, but upload that information to the Board of Elections or some sort of central election database that same evening. So is there an election where you could have someone win by 32 votes and we don't know that night? Yeah. But I don't envision any scenario where it's taking weeks with people counting paper or chads or anything like that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Fiala?
Thank you. Mr. Morano, I want to first of all thank you for your testimony tonight, but I also want to thank you for your written submission to us a month or so ago. I want you to know I did get it, and I did read every line of it.
Thank you.
And as...
My sympathies.
No typos?
Oh, there were a few. Sorry.
None that I caught. It helps to inform my judgment on this body. And you've testified before us, before other bodies that I've been on, so you know my feelings. You know, when you keep hearing 25 years the same complaint, you get a little frustrated when you start to listen to the proposed remedies to deal with the ailment. I'm a Catholic, and the fastest growing segment of the populations out there, us Catholics say, are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. It's the same with voters, right? The fastest growing segment over the last decades has been the unaffiliated. And the argument that I keep hearing and have heard for 20 some odd years, and now my third commission is, we don't have any meaningful voice. And everything you guys talk about doing doesn't affect me, unless I decide to join the club that you want me to join. So here's the question I have, because we've established that, or I've conceded that, ranked choice voting is bold and it's efficient. In your view, is ranked choice voting sufficient enough to incentivize more people to come out to the polls? In other words, will people come out and will the politicians running have to appeal to a broader swath of voters? Ranked choice voting get us there?
I think the first thing that ranked choice voting would do is make campaigns a little less negative, because people not only have to appeal to their narrow plurality, they have to hope that they're the second choice of a whole broader group. So I think that's one of the reasons why you see in cities that have utilized ranked choice voting, they report much less negative campaigns, which I think we could all agree is a positive for voter participation and for voter education. Look, nonpartisan elections is something that I have been coming before charter revision commissions and testifying in support of since literally 2002. Why only 4 of the members of this commission decided that it was worth giving the voters the opportunity to weigh in themselves and have you make that decision for them is something that I will honestly never understand. And it really reinforces not only my cynicism about commissions appointed by politicians, but I think reinforces the cynicism of the public that you've decided that they shouldn't have the right to choose, and that you don't think they should determine what type of election system they deserve to participate in. As an unaffiliated voter myself, I consider myself a second-class political citizen. I have to pay for elections that I have no ability to participate in. I have Democrats coming up to me all the time, and Republicans, almost literally on a daily basis, saying, you know, you should really be a Democrat. You could get elected to public office. Or you should really be a Republican. You should really you could get elected to public office. What a sad commentary that you're telling voters, not this individual, but the system is telling voters that you have to set aside your own political convictions in order to even have a chance at serving your community. I wish you would reconsider nonpartisan elections or proportional representation, which worked well for 12 years to elect the city council, but you're not. So we all do what we can, and I think this ranked choice voting would be an important reform to move the needle forward a little bit, and I think it would really help.
Thank you. You added a little twist about that ranked choice voting, aside from being bold and efficient, you said it would make us a little more civil?
I hope so, and that's what's been reported.
We have a reasonable expectation to assume that because
That's what's happened.
politicians will appeal to a broader swath, they won't be appealing to the base.
Right.
So maybe we'll be a little more civil.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Joyce D. Hutton, is she here? You missed we called you before. If you would come up, along with Richard Kazami, Robert Saran or Saran, Ken A. And Susan Lerner. We're going to get an extra chair. Ms. Hutton, if you would take the microphone.
Oh, I didn't know I was coming up here.
Okay.
Oh, well, you filled out a speaker slip. You don't
Yes,
have to speak.
I thought I was going to stand over there. I'll do the best I can.
Here,
Okay.
I got here. Let me give you the
I
mic.
know this should work. Yes.
The floor is yours.
Oh. I'm a little nervous. Okay, y'all really caught me off guard. I'm a native New Yorker, a senior. I won't tell you my age. I'm proud of it, but I live in NYC in Astoria Development for 30 years. I left out of there. This is all. My request here is to let you know we need more low-income developments and senior buildings. I left Astoria housing because a few of us worked. A lot of people didn't work. They were taking care of the grandkids. Grandkids taking care of the grandparents were happy. A lot of friction going on, so I moved into a senior building. So I've been there 14 years. I've been the president for 13 years. The police are limited with rules and regulation. I know all of y'all can speak and change your life, but you need a civilian group to interact with the mayor and the police commissioner, because the police department hands are tied. We have young drug addicts and drug dens in our senior building on 4 floors. And the police try to work with us, but their hands are tied because the mayor is all about, people being in the streets, homeless people. So they slow up on rules and regulations. You need civilian people to talk. We live in these buildings. We experience a whole lot. A lot of us are scared where we live. All senior buildings, because you got young adults coming in with some of the seniors that go outside. They come friends with them, then they move in. Once they come in to your apartment, you can't get them out. So all the rules need to be changed with the police department and the mayor. Never mind with the homeless, you gotta build more developments. There's not enough buildings to place people. You're allowing people to come to this country, that's fine. But you're not building no low-income houses. They're not there. They got all these skyscrapers all around in Queens, but you can't afford them. I mean, I get Social Security and a little pension. Thank God for that. Couple of years, they didn't give us the cost of living because they said they had to take that money and help people that come to this country with no money, nowhere to go. Okay? I'm not for the dual citizenship. I'm sorry, but this is the fact. There are people living in our building, and I'm sure other buildings have the taste of two worlds of milk and honey. And some of them in my building, they got homes in their country, getting rent, so renting it out, whatever. They go back and forth. And if you're born here, you have to fight for your rights for survival here, because I don't have no other place to go. This is it.
Thank
All
you,
right?
Mrs. Hutton.
So there got to be more buildings for the seniors. We don't have nowhere to go. Change those rules. Get these drug addicts out of our buildings. That's what y'all got to work on.
Thank you, Mrs. Hutton.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Vaca?
You got a question?
I want to thank you for your testimony. I do want to be honest and let you know that much of what you spoke about is not something that the New York City Charter per se can address. But I'm very upset when I hear a senior citizen like you talk at a meeting and say that you live in a senior citizen building and you have 4 drug dens in your building. That upset me very much.
You ever heard of piggyback?
Piggyback? No,
Yes.
I don't know what that means.
A social worker had to tell me that. I came home one evening, celebrate my birthday, 12 o'clock at night, got off the Access and ride. Being I'm born in the Bronx, I looked to the left, I looked to the right. I didn't see anybody. Soon as I got to the first doors, this guy came right up behind me. He was coming in with me. But there are other people in this, the lobby with the security guard. And he sucked his teeth because he couldn't come in with me because there were other people there. And he scared me. He had to stay there, wait till I came in, and then he rang the intercom to let one of his buddies buzz him in. And he ran up the stairs. Then I called security because I got angry because the security guard didn't even ask him to sign the book. He just ran up the stairs, and they're so comfortable. They even had the nerve, one apartment, went to court. Nigel came up with the locksmith and the police, changed the lock. The guys had run out, changed the lock. 20 minutes later, the 2 guys came back with a locksmith and they changed the lock and they're back in there and they can't get them out.
Well, I know we have to move on, but you are a tenant president. I want you respected. We do have at the city council a community engagement unit. I'm not
You're not talking about NYCHA and community
No,
engagement.
I'm not talking about NYCHA community engagement. I'm talking about people in the council who want to help people like you. And I would like someone from the council staff to at least get your phone number and have council engagement, community engagement reach out to you. Because you should not have to live that way. And you came here tonight, and you're entitled to some response, and I would like that done. Let us try to help you.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hutton. Richard Kazami?
Yes, that's me. Thanks. I want to begin by saying that I just found out about this myself yesterday through email, but I want to come down and take an opportunity to hear what's going on with the commission. And again, as the other individual said before, I saw the bullet points, and there's a few things I'd like to comment on. So, I'm the president of the Old Astoria Neighborhood Association. I'm also 20 years on Community Board 1, and I've been sitting on the Land Use Committee that long in Queens. Also 11 years as Parks Chair. So, first of all, I saw, if I'm correctly reading this, you want to relieve the Community Board any responsibility of meeting in June or July and August for any meetings on any land use? Was that what it said?
What the staff has recommended
Yeah.
is that we look at, a number of community boards came to our hearing earlier and spoke about the problems of ULURP applications that are certified during the summer.
Right.
And so the staff has recommended that we look at adding an additional period of time, maybe 15 days, to the 60 days for applications that are certified in the summer.
So we can push our date up until September so that we, as you know, as volunteers, we need our summers off. So I appreciate that, and I'm fully in favor of that. Also, on the rezoning section, again, if I'm reading this correctly, you were speaking about the EIS on as-of-right development. One of the issues that, one of the things that's an issue is there's areas on Community District 1 that haven't been rezoned for 61 years. So those as-of-right are so out of date at this point that I think that you make a good point in requiring it. So maybe there's a time element that could be used to require an environmental statement. It's a possibility. Also, the rezonings themselves, I would like to see, because of that, I just happened to have written a letter to city planning a while ago, and these were some of we're trying to rezone that area that hasn't been rezoned in Ravenswood for 61 years. Some of the points that were brought up, number one, the neighborhood would have input in what their neighborhood would look like to ensure the quality of life they deserve while allowing controlled growth and facilitating jobs and commercial development. 2, developers would be able to forego the expensive and time-consuming ULURP process. They would know immediately what type of building they would be able to put in and make smart investments decisions with some certainty. 3, homeowners and buyers would have clarity as to the nature of the neighborhood they're investing in. 4, the new zoning would reflect more accurately current uses and guide development in a positive fashion for the neighborhood. And 5, and this is something that used to gall me, it's almost impossible for a spot zoning or variance to be properly determined without an overall plan to compare it to. Without doing that, with a lot of spot zonings, you're just going to create chaos. Recently we had a 14-story zoning on Northern Boulevard, but we had no idea whether they wanted to create a corridor or 7X or 14 stories. So how do we decide, with any intelligence, whether to approve it or not? So this is, we're in the midst of trying to get this done. So a couple other things having to do with budget, okay? Quickly, when itemized budgets, great idea. I was Parks Chair. It was budgets we were given of $5 million to put a bathroom in a park. The community wanted to know where the hell that $5 million was going, and all we got was the flat number. We didn't get a breakdown. So I think that's really very, very important. So those are my points.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. Kazami?
You mentioned spot zoning. Are you saying that in your district spot zoning was done?
It's regular zoning variances, basically, yeah.
A variance to BSA is one thing.
Yeah.
A variance
There's
by
BSAs
nature,
and there's also the ULURPs too.
well, a variance by nature is for an individual property. But the City Planning Commission has always said that they don't do spot zoning, yet I know that they do spot zoning when they want to do spot zoning.
BSA does also, there are maybe city planning will rezone a block. Half of it will be for one particular owner. Okay, they will expand it a little bit. That's what happens quite often. But, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's still hard to make decisions when you don't know the context as to what people are looking ahead for.
Or consistency.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kazami. Mr. Saran or Saran?
Saran, Robert Saran.
Saran?
Saran. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I just found out about this today also. I'm a Chief Operating Officer for United Planning Solutions Incorporated out here in Hollis, New York. And we provide financial services for individuals and families. But one of the things we do a lot of is help provide low-income individuals with the first-time homebuyer grant program available in New York City. We also work with Global Resurrection LLC, which is a developer of green initiatives, out of which Donovan Gordon, one of our partners, is now the right-hand man for Governor Cuomo. One of the questions that I have, individuals you have already alluded to, a lot of us going to.
Mr. Saran, could you move the microphone a little further away. We're having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay, how about now?
Try
Okay.
that.
All right. What we do as at United Planning Solutions, Inc. is help low-income individuals to have access to the first-time home buyer grant program in New York City. We also work with Global Resurrection LLC, which is a land developer, as well as Green Initiatives, of which Hal Hamilton and Donovan Gordon especially now are working with Governor Cuomo. But one of the things that we've seen, and I'm not an expert in the field, but as far as the land development and environmental issues, the way they impact low-income individuals and keep them from having access. What I would like to know is, as this commission looked into planning issues, rezoning issues, as was alluded here, and time effectiveness, as well as opportunities for low-income individuals to participate in this land use program.
We have heard a lot from different communities about the need for planning and the need for planning different parts of the community. And staff has been looking at these issues, both with respect to doing overall assessments of the city and where it needs to go, and as Mr. Kober said, where growth should go. But yes, there are a number of recommendations in the report about planning for the future and about how to conduct the individual ULURP items that may come before the council or the community board or the borough president. Is that system working? So you may want to take a look at that and then be in touch with us some more. Thank you very much, Mr. Saran. Are there any questions? Ken A?
Yep. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. So I am with a group called Open New York. We advocate for more housing, and the reason for that is since 2009, we added to the population about 500,000 people to New York City, and that's great. We welcome that, but we only added about 100K new housing units to the city, and that's causing rents to go up. It's making buying your first home if you're a millennial impossible. And one of the key things we want to see is more housing in New York City, especially to keep up with population growth. So on the issue of comprehensive planning, there's a couple of things that we would like to see. First, comprehensive planning would be a big first step to address the macro issue that we're not building enough housing for not only people like me who are coming to the city. I've been in New York City since 2011. I plan to be here for the rest of my life, but people like her who've been here the whole life and have their roots here. And so I encourage a comprehensive plan, but also a comprehensive plan with some teeth in it. And what I would like to see, or we would like to see, is a comprehensive plan that addresses population growth as something that must be addressed with new housing. Any housing targets should be measured against housing demand and population growth. And if a neighborhood decides not to meet its targets, then the Department of City Planning should be able or mandated to rezone to allow for more housing growth in that neighborhood. And one more last thing is we would like to see no delays, no summer breaks for zoning for new housing. The city desperately needs new housing, not only for newcomers, but for long-time residents too. So that's what my comments are.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Mr. A? Reverend Miller?
Yeah, thank you for your testimony. Certainly we're in an affordable housing crisis, and there should be a comprehensive housing plan for everybody. There are a lot of homeowners in New York City that own homes that have vacant basements. In addition to building new construction, would you consider basements a key part of a comprehensive plan for affordable housing?
Oh, yes. If new basements become available for housing in a safe and can satisfy housing needs, then I'm all for it, yes.
Are there any other questions for Mr. A? Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Susan Lerner.
Yes, now I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for holding the hearing. I'm Susan Lerner, Executive Director of Common Cause New York, and I'm planning to testify today about ranked choice voting. I'll take the opportunity to address other issues at another hearing. We at Common Cause strongly support the need for ranked choice voting here in New York City, and we appreciate the staff's report and a strong endorsement for the concept of ranked choice voting, and welcome the opportunity to talk about the details. We think that now is the right time to adopt ranked choice voting because of the really significant number of races which will be open in the 2021 cycle for the city, because our research has shown that when you have open seats, you have a significant number of multi-candidate primaries. And we prepared some charts to help you comprehend really what an outsized, excellent influence our campaign finance system has by encouraging multiplicities of candidates to run. And we believe this is a direct result of our campaign finance system and term limits. And therefore, we have a unique situation, I believe, in New York City because we have such a large number of multi-candidate races. Not unusual for an open seat, particularly in the primaries for the city council, to see 8, 10, or 12 candidates running. And when that happens, more than 2/3 of the races, when you look at the totality where we analyzed 2009 through 2017, we see that 66% of the races were multi-candidate races in the primaries. And what was also striking to us was how many of those, so the result of that is that when you have multi-candidate primaries, what we see is that the result is pretty much a duplication of that pie chart that we have. 36% of the multi-candidate races, the winner won with a clear majority. So flip that. 2/3 of the people who ultimately win the primaries, and in all honesty, in virtually every single race in our city, if you win the primary, there's an extraordinarily high percentage probability that you are going to be the office holder after the general election. So you have people who won.
Is that true for all parties or just for the Democratic Party?
No, well, think of Staten Island, okay, where you have a heavy Republican electorate, and if there's a very high probability that if you are the Republican candidate for borough-wide office, and you win that primary, you're probably going to be the borough president. Same thing with the council districts that have traditionally been Republican. So no, it is both parties. But what that means is that we have elected officials who at the very beginning were the choice of a minority of the voters, particularly in the city council. We think this is not healthy, and we think that ranked choice voting is a very effective way to address that, so that the ultimate winner of the primary with all of these candidates can say that they are the consensus choice of most people in the district. That's not to say that they're first out of the post, but with ranked choice voting that they have built a broad base of support, and we think that that is much healthier for our democracy. And we also were struck with the breakdown, this is my next chart, in how few multi-candidate races in the primary we saw for citywide offices or for borough president. Less than 10% of the primary races for citywide office are multi-candidate. And when you look at the borough president primaries, 5%. And yet, when we look at city council primaries, it's almost 90%. 86% of the races are multi-candidate, by which we mean 3 or more candidates running in the primary. So for that reason, we believe that ranked choice voting would be very positive for our particular situation. And looking at our particular situation in New York City, we believe that ranked choice voting should be used in the primaries and in the specials. We disagree with our colleagues and friends in the Green Party that right now, with our situation in New York City, we're not recommending it for the general election. And that is a evolved position that Common Cause has had a change between the two charter revision commissions. Originally, we suggested ranked choice voting for all elections. And as we started to look at actually drafting the provision, and we have suggested a specific language for ranked choice voting, the complications of how fusion voting is treated on ballots, it seemed to us, was a difficulty which would end up in actually creating more ballot exhaustion. It's the one place where we thought ballot exhaustion could appear. And in all practical terms, the truth of the matter is we do not see our New York City Board of Election open to the idea of changing the way in which they lay out the ballot. And they insist on having candidates run in multiple places under different party lines rather than the Oregon style of fusion where you list the candidate and then whatever party they're running under. We believe that that would result in people voting for the same person 2 or 3 times, and that could invalidate and lessen the strength of ranked choice voting.
Okay, could you sum up, Susan?
Yes, also we provided some information regarding the impact on candidates of color, the experience in 4 cities in the Bay Area in California is very striking. Whether you have a white district, you have a district where you have a white plurality with people of color as the majority, or you have a majority people of color district. In each of those circumstances, people of color did better under ranked choice voting than they did under first out of the post. So we've provided our answers to the 5 considerations. I'd like to just run through them, and we'll expand with a written explanation. We believe ranked choice voting should be applied to the primary and special elections only. We believe that to gain the full benefits of ranked choice voting, it should be used in primaries and special elections for all city offices. We don't believe that it should be phased in. We have so many offices open in 2021. It should be for all offices in 2021. We don't believe that a hybrid system is beneficial. In fact, we think it plays on the weaknesses of both systems. We recommend ranking 5 candidates, and we recommend using the machine tabulation as they do in Minneapolis. I'd also like to point out that unfortunately, star voting is not used for any political elections anywhere in the world, unlike ranked choice voting, which is used in countries and many cities here in the U.S. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. I know that Councilmember Fiala has been waiting anxiously and listening.
Thank you. Ms. Lerner, thank you as always for testifying and for the multi-page presentation. I took note in your remarks, and you referenced that the Common Cause position has changed. That's a curious factor for me. Why is it that, let me back up. I think you see a theme with me, and it's this, that I keep hearing bold, bold, bold solutions for a bold, big city. And what I keep seeing is solutions where we dip one toe in and keep one toe out. We want regular elections and we want nonpartisan elections.
Well, we're not recommending nonpartisan.
Ranked choice voting for some elections, but not all elections. Why is it good in some instances and not another? And if I give you the other question, I got two more. You depart from all of those that testified earlier. You're saying that limit it to 5 when we're being told that limiting it actually leads to increase in voter fatigue. And finally, I'm just curious, because you referenced campaign financing here, what is Common Cause's position on democracy vouchers? So there are 3 things. I'm sorry, but I thought I'd better throw it all at you and let you answer it.
So we're intrigued by democracy vouchers. We think we need to have more experience. It's something actually that we're looking at as possibility, a hybrid matching fund system and vouchers to suggest at the state level. In terms of why we would recommend for New York City that we use ranked choice voting only for the primaries and special and not the general, that is only specific to New York City, and that has to do with the peculiarities of our ballot that our Board of Elections insists on laying out a particular way. Otherwise, we would prefer to see ranked choice voting for all elections, but we believe that it will lead to overvoting and ballot fatigue, people who vote for the same candidate 2 or 3 times because they appear 2 or 3 times, and then when you rank, they will not have the full benefit of the ranking. And I'm sorry, remind me of your middle question. The five. It comes personally from my experience in making decisions on the public advocate's race. I realized there was, no matter how much attention I paid, I was not clear on who my 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th candidate were. But I am pretty clear on my top 5. We recommend 5 as a direct result to the concerns, which we think are overblown, of Professor Burnett. We think that ballot exhaustion has been way overemphasized in the discussion, particularly when you look at the extraordinary drop-off between a race and a runoff. And we think that there's a much bigger problem with campaign fatigue than there is with ballot fatigue in any one election.
Okay, just
So that's why we chose 5.
That was very thorough. Thank you. Just so I'm clear, back on the exclusion or inclusion of general elections. If the Board of Elections could accommodate ranked choice voting in a general election system, Common Cause would be in favor of it.
They can accommodate it. It's not the accommodation. The voting technology that's in use in New York City today is the same as in Minneapolis, and with minor reprogramming is able to handle ranked choice voting. It's the actual layout of the ballot, which, as I thought about how I would educate voters, I realized people have a natural sense of ranking. But to say, if you rank the same person's here 3 times, but you can only pick them as 1, 2, or 3. If you pick at 1 or 2 or 3, if you pick the same person because that's your favorite 3 times, you're only going to get the benefit of having them in the first place. When we go to number 2, you're not going to have a number 2. You go to number 3, you're not going to have a number 3. And so when I was drafting a proposal of language for charter revision, and I included specific suggestions regarding requirements for education, including that there be an entire page of the voter guide devoted to ranked choice voting, I thought I personally would have a very difficult time explaining to the voter how not to vote for the same person over and over again.
Thank you.
Jimmy?
This is very interesting. Let me ask you something. So why not tell the voter you only have 2 choices? You have 6 people running for mayor. Why don't you just tell the voter you can go in and vote for your first choice and your second choice? Doesn't that enable the voter to focus more on who is the second choice? They may have their first choice picked out, but they're not able to vote for a third or fourth. So therefore, they're going to have to focus on who their second's going to be.
So in that situation where you've got a really large spate of candidates, you don't have enough mathematically to do a meaningful ranking. So that you're eliminating so many people as 1 and 2 that when you do further rounds, there's a chance that you don't actually reach a majority. Then you would need a hybrid system, and we believe that a hybrid system is the worst of both worlds. You don't get the full benefit of the ranking. You're running a simultaneous tabulation, and then you're spending $15 million for a runoff.
Do you see a complication? Because when we vote in primaries, we're going to have, let's say we have a primary in 2021 for mayor, public advocate, controller.
Right.
So then we assume borough president and city council. But at the same time, we could have primaries for district leaders, state committee people,
DAs,
judges, So therefore, those are state offices, and the
Right.
state is not going to have ranked voting. So how do we have a ballot that tells the people, tells the voter, this is where you have ranked voting, but now when you reach a certain point, you have to only vote for one person for the office and not rank who you're
So-
voting for because of the state not having our system?
Right. So we don't have to invent the wheel on this one. There are cities in exactly that situation. And what they do is it's a question of ballot design and ballot layout. One thing that you can do is have your city offices on one side with clear instructions, and then you flip over the ballot for the state offices, and that is different instructions. So what we've seen is that the one thing that is a through line and that is essential is that supporters of ranked choice voting, like Common Cause and others, have got to be ready to follow through with meaningful voter education, or else whatever change is adopted, whether it's ranked choice voting or something else, will not work. So the city needs to engage in voter education, but the advocates also have to engage in voter education. And that's why we've been putting together a coalition of groups that include the New York Immigration Coalition, and the Chinese American Planning Council, and Minkwan, Citizens Union, and others who want to see the city adopt ranked choice voting and who are prepared to put our time, energy, and skills into ensuring that voters know what's happening.
Any other questions? I'd like to thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And for sharing your time with us. And I'd like to thank everyone in the audience for the same. I have exhausted my speaker slips. So with that, I would say this public hearing is over. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. And we do need to vote on the minutes from the last meeting. Let me just. Oh, it's down here. I will entertain a motion to adopt the minutes of the Commission's meeting held on March 25th at City Hall, a copy of which has been provided to all of the... Hello? So moved.
Okay.
All those in favor?
I'm
What?
not Mark President.
Yeah. Aren't you?
No, I'm not Mark President. I said he would.
Okay, we'll take a look, Jimmy. I do remember you being there, so if you're not marked present in the minutes, we'll... I'm not sure we're being taped now, but if you're not marked present in the minutes, we'll get you present and we'll adopt an amended version at the next meeting on Thursday. So now can we do it again? We have a motion, we have a second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? The minutes are adopted. Now, as you know, we have one last item, which was discussion. My mic is not working. I can't. I don't know what.
It's working? No. Hello? I think they cut the sound. Yeah.
Hello?
Hello? No. Hello?
Maybe this is the deity's way of saying we shouldn't be doing this. They're not working. Yeah, I would like. and getting a sense from the other commissioners about their concerns about the same. I would say that I thought in general, and I have cautioned everyone, that this is a report that is presented by the staff to the commissioners and is not a product of any commissioner's thinking or thoughts. There will come a time when we will clearly have to put up or shut up, as they say in where I grew up. But this is not that moment. It is still the information gathering. But if there are things that you know you would like to know more about, or things that you think you would like to not have staff pursue, we can all talk about those things so that when we finally get to voting, we're more of a consensus than not. Paula?
I could just shout, you know? I did work for the YMCA, right? You know, I have a general concern that I just want to say, and I've expressed it before to a number of you. You know, in keeping with our bold is the word for tonight, goal to really make changes that will help us for the next 30 years. I am concerned that a number of the recommendations are not addressing a current problem or a future opportunity, and that they're seemingly addressing some other issues. So I'll give examples from my point of view. The corporate counsel, advice and consent, impoundment, the revenue estimates. I don't see those as big problems, having heard all the expert forums. I don't see those as big opportunities for solving future problems. So I just hope as we go forward, we will look at things from their impact. What is their impact, as well as do no harm. So I just wanted to express that to everyone, and I've told a number of people that, but I just publicly wanted to say that.
And I can speak, so thank you. I think actually Steve was next.
Yeah, do you want to go next?
And then
You go first.
I would, I should have done this at the beginning, so I'm sorry for not having done this at the beginning. This is the stage when the staff kind of gets punched in the gut by everybody, right? I want to say the staff has done an extraordinary job in taking all the materials that we've heard, and it was a lot, and putting them in the right buckets and giving it to us in a manner that was easy to read, easy to understand, and now to listen to the debates. So kudos to the staff. You're probably not going to hear that much now going forward. I would just like to ask the Commission to consider diving in deeper. The areas for me are the ones that, I started this process with. The Rainy Day Fund, I think, is an extraordinary opportunity for this body to address. It is bold. Right now we have a healthcare stabilization fund, which is used as a rainy day fund. That's wrong. It's wrong fiscally, it's wrong morally. We have an opportunity to shore up that health stabilization fund. Bear in mind, this city has $250 billion in unfunded liabilities going forward. So I think we have a fiduciary responsibility to generations yet born, while at the same time then also creating a true rainy day fund. I want to add something, and I talked about this previously, briefly. I started out as a non-starter on, I have to say to my right is the forefather of this idea, the democracy vouchers. And listening to the materials that I heard, I think that's a bolder approach, a cleaner approach, a leaner and more transparent approach than the one we presently have. So I'd like us to look at that. I've submitted to staff some thoughts. I don't want to go into much more detail here because we still have several of these hearings, but those are two areas that if we could take a deeper dive, I think we'd be doing a great service to the city. And I think you all know where I stand on the election stuff. I hope I didn't lead anyone to conclude that I don't think ranked choice voting is a good idea. I do. I just happen to think that it's not as bold as we could be. But I concede it is very, very bold. And I love what Mr. Morano brought up that I hadn't heard before, and that is that it could lead to an even more civil way of campaigning. So that in and of itself is a worthy endeavor. Sal, you're next.
Well, thank you. I too would like to commend the staff for their great work, and their thoroughness. However, at the end of the day, it's the commissioners that are accountable. Staff won't be held accountable. And my concern, as many of you know, has been how do we make the city government more democratic? How do we increase participation? How do we reduce conflicts of interest? And I have to say that democracy vouchers is one of my top priorities, and I will ask people to vote on it at the end of the day, because I think that the second round in Seattle has been even more successful than the first round. I just read the latest information. It's obviously, it's cheaper, it's cleaner, it makes average people real players in our electoral process. We do know that people of color are basically not donors in this town, as we saw that the Campaign Finance Board doesn't even have stats how many people of color donate to campaigns. And most middle class and working class people, regardless of color, just don't donate to campaigns. They live check to check. And I think this is an opportunity for us to do something really bold. I mean, the matching system, in my opinion, is inadequate. It favors insiders, it's expensive, and doesn't really democratize the process, and I speak from personal experience. And it doesn't really help independent grassroots candidates. I think that I was disappointed, obviously, in our failure to even explore open primaries, and that ship has sailed. I would like for us to explore independent redistricting. I don't think that was addressed in the report, where we talk about there are other cities that really involve citizens in the redistricting process. I think that should be separated from politics, and people who are in office should not be selecting the people who design these districts. And finally, the issue of pension reform is very important. The city contributes $12 billion to our pension fund. It definitely underperforms other pension systems, especially the Canadian system, which I favor. And I think at the very least, we should consider asking that a Blue Ribbon Commission study the pension system and look at the structure. And I'm a little bit concerned about the fact that we talk about we need state involvement in this particular area, therefore we can't address it. While in other areas we say, okay, staff recommends we do this, and we also recommend that the state legislature approve X, Y, and Z. So in one respect, we're saying we can't include something because of state overrides the city. And in other cases, we're saying, well, we're going to rank order voting, for example, which I think is a good thing. We're saying that staff recommends we explore it, but at the same time, we do need state legislation for X, Y, and Z. So sometimes we use that as a shield, and other times we use it as a sword. So those are my concerns.
I keep going back and forth, but so I just want to third or fourth the staff compliments on the detail and rigor that went into the report. I want to second some of what Paula was saying. I think in general, the scope from the beginning, the scope of our commission has been huge. And I'm concerned that as we get into crunch time, some of what we're proposing, we won't actually have the time to think through all of the repercussions, and do believe that we need to be bold in some areas and do no harm in others. Well, we need to do no harm throughout, but I think that do no harm principle will have to stop us from being bold in other areas. I also am trying to visualize, and this may be a conversation for later, what the ballot will look like with, pages and pages of charter revision changes in an election that we probably expect the lowest voter turnout of any election in the last decade, probably, because there's no other, this is the only thing on the ballot. Oh, the public advocate is on the ballot. I forgot about that. Queens DA. Well, that is a good point that I had actually forgotten about. But so just understanding that part of our job, once we get to the point of really winnowing these down into proposals to move forward, is a robust education campaign to make sure that the voters have a true understanding of what we want to accomplish.
I absolutely agree with you about the robust voter. I don't know how many questions there'll be on the ballot. That's something we're going to have to deal with and talk about. As you know, everybody points to 1989 and the massive amount of changes, but there were only 2 questions. So, however large the scope is, it will be up to us to determine how many questions we think would be appropriate and what would be in each question. Oh, and everything was in one question. There was only one thing in the second question, which was police accountability. That was in a second question.
I wanted to thank the staff for all their work. I think they did a great job, and I think, like Gail said, it's up to us to sort of, take it from there. I want to give a little counterpoint to what Paula said, in the sense that, some of the proposals that I agree with, such as the law department and the budget changes, I don't think they're going to be solutions to major problems, but I think we're talking about sort of the structure of government and democracy, and I think, we have probably a stronger mayoral government than just about any big city in the country. And I think it should remain a strong mayoral government, but there are small changes that I think would allow other voices to at least be present in discussions. And right now, for example, in the budget, when you have each commissioner essentially having a blank check for his or her agency because it's not broken down at all, the entire agency's programs are in one unit. What I think that does is make the council focus on their little pot of discretionary funding. And I think that's what the mayor wants. We have a $92 billion budget. You have $250 million in discretionary funding. You go into the kiddie pool and play with the discretionary funding and let the big boys deal with the $91.75 billion. And I think some of these proposals, they're not going to magically change things. They're not going to undermine the mayor's party powers. They're not going to cause the creditors to flee the city. They're just going to give the council a little more voice. That's why I like some of the land use proposals, something where people can submit comments or have meetings pre-certification, so that certification doesn't mean the cake is baked and you can decide where the candles go or what color the frosting is, which is essentially what happens now under ULIP. Just giving people slightly giving, I think that's part of democracy, letting other voices at least be present at the table and weigh somewhat into the conversation, even if ultimately the decision-making, authority remains the same. And I think the one thing that I would support that perhaps wasn't in the proposals was the idea that maybe borough presidents could submit texts to a ULURP that wouldn't require a lengthening of the ULURP process. It would have to fit within the time frame. Again, it wouldn't be that the borough president could change a ULURP. They could just make an A-text proposal that would then go to the city planning commission. So they would have no more ultimate authority. It would just be another voice. So I think that that's part of democracy.
Just like everybody else, general consensus is the staff has done a fantastic job, and we all agree with that. I don't think any one of us here deny that. I too have a concern about how large this proposal is going to be. So obviously we have to do our due diligence to bring it down to I don't know what an acceptable number is, but whatever it is we feel the public can handle. There are a lot of things here that I really want to comment on, but one thing I do think we have to look at it, and I know the chair has said that maybe some of it could be done through the legislative process, but we have to look at what the public has been asking. Excuse me. And I'd be willing to sit on that or go visit that panel of discussion with the police elected review board. I'd be willing to listen to that and hear what they got to say, because I think obviously it's a concern. It's been a concern from the beginning, and I do believe we have to pay attention to that. But again, I think the commissioners, the committee, the staff has been doing a fantastic job. I think one of the commissioners said it was a Herculean, I forget what she said. I think it was you, Camila, right? That said it was a Herculean, whatever it was. Fantastic job. You guys are doing a great job, and I want to thank you for all the work you're doing and obviously making our life a little easier.
Certainly, the staff is on point, considering that there has been a low voter turnout, I think that our work as far as the changes we propose on the city charter should be very aggressive yet responsible. There are a couple of landmarks in the neighborhood. On the way here, drove by Sean Bell Way, a couple of blocks away. Donald Trump grew up in the church, going to church right around the corner, as ironic as that is. So I guess my question is a procedural question. I would like to have seen the ability for us to do more as far as the CCRB be elected. How much latitude do we have as a commission, despite the recommendations that are made by the staff, to go back and make our own recommendations? I guess that's my question.
Well, we have some abilities, but we do need to operate within the law. And as you know, the police is an area that is well regulated. Many of the regulations are not ones that are available to this commission to change. They're in state law, they're in documents that are specifically about discipline, whether they're union contracts or others. There's a whole, I'm losing my words, I'm sorry. There's a whole area that surrounds the police that we have to operate within, and then within that, what is left and available as a charter issue. So I agree that we should meet with people. I know that we had asked a number of the people who have spoken about this issue to give us their thinking and papers, if they have them, on how they see the law and the issue of elected boards in this area, but we do have to operate within that. I think Lucette is next.
Thank you. That was the longest pass through in a while. I have a terrible catch. So first, I just want to say thank you very much to the staff. This has been, like I said, a Herculean effort to bound together all of the things that we've heard and to sift through all of the testimony and put together this report, I just really want to say how appreciative I am. But I wanted to just flag two things. I want to echo Allison's point before. I have serious concerns with putting forward a ballot with even a subset of the recommendations that are included in the report. We have a very broad mandate, and I know that it has been done in the past when you cram all of these different things into one or two questions, but I think it does a disservice to the electorate to do that, because if you happen to agree with one and not the other, you're forced to pick or answer a question that might not represent your entire position on all of the different elements. So that then would lead to multiple questions if you're going to parse out one question per topic. And as we start going down the line, you're going to have an unwieldy ballot. And I think that's going to lead to either uninformed responses or an unwieldy ballot that I don't believe it serves the electorate well. So I just have to get that off my chest, because as I'm looking through the proposals, all of which are, I understand why they're there. I think we have to make tough choices to scale back the proposals we put forth. That's just I feel very strongly about that. The second thing is, as we start looking at things to carve out, I know that we've taken a number of proposals off the table that could be done through legislation. I think we can still continue to do that. I do think that there are some recommendations in the report that can be achieved through legislation or other means. And one of the things that I will highlight, and I won't go through all of my opinions and positions, but for the units of appropriation, for example, I agree that some agencies are the units of appropriations are too large and you don't have a lot of visibility. But that's not the case for all agencies. DCAS, my agency, has 18 units of appropriation. And come this budget cycle, we'll have 19. So that can be achieved through negotiation, through another means other than changing the charter to do this. Because what we'll be changing is language to be tweaked, and that will have its own potential interpretation, and people can use that to circumvent either way. So I think ultimately the power of negotiations through a budget that the council can achieve or can use to put pressure on agencies to get more clarity and more transparency can be done. Budget hearings, oversight hearings, all of these things are tools to gain visibility into budget. And I just wanted to highlight that one because, yes, there are some examples where it's truly too rolled up. I get that. But there are other examples that, like my agency, have multiple unit of appropriations. We talk about and we try to be transparent as possible, but that comes out through negotiation. So if we can start looking at ways to scale back on the proposals and use some sort of guiding post like that, it would be helpful for all of us.
I first, of course, want to thank the staff and Gail and everyone. The staff did a fantastic job with the report. A couple of things that I wanted to be heard on. First of all, I support what Jim Karras spoke about regarding units of appropriation, and I did hear the commissioner's remarks. I have to say that we went through this in the council when Julissa Ferreras was chair of the Finance Committee. Julissa had requested more specificity on the units of appropriation. The mayor's office disagreed. It went back and forth. I think that we can't have things agreed upon where sometimes formality and making it part of our charter would be better. The charter lives in perpetuity. The council cannot do its oversight job correctly and as intended unless we have the information at our disposal that we need. I'm concerned with any possible infringement upon the mayor to impound funds. We had a fiscal crisis in the 1970s which brought our city to its knees. The mayor had to lay people off, including school teachers and firemen. I'm old enough to remember those days. The mayor had to do what he had to do or we would have hit bankruptcy. at that time. We were attacked at 9/11 in an unpredictable attack that brought the city to its financial knees. The mayor at that time, Mayor Giuliani and Bloomberg, had to make tough decisions. So I don't want to infringe upon that ultimate power. It should not be used often. It's not been used recently to my recollection, but it should be there for the mayor. And by the same token, talking about accountability, the mayor, based on the financial control board that we had instituted back in the 1970s when we had Washington telling us to drop dead at that time, that financial control board reasserted that it is the mayor who is held ultimately responsible for the fiscal shape of this city. And I don't want an independent budget office, as independent as they are, to give that budget estimate. The budget estimate's an estimate. The council has the right to negotiate a budget. The council has a right to say, there is more money than you say, Mr. Mayor. We want restorations. And we have done that. But to have an entity not elected by the people, not accountable to anyone, make budget estimates for the city is where I would take umbrage. My recommendations to the commission. Let's say one of the recommendations I made is that when a ULURP item is certified, that if it's a citywide application, that there be allowance for the planning commissioner, one member of the commission, could step forth and ask for a 30-day delay in certification. We're always talking about community engagement. Everywhere we went, and everywhere the mayor's commission went, we heard about communities that felt they were not in the process, that they were locked out. And I have recommended that prior to an item being certified, one commissioner and one commissioner only of the Planning Commission would be allowed to say, I am requesting a 30-day hold to allow for more community engagement. I think that's important. Let's say the mayor comes forth and he proposes 5 marine transfer stations, one in each borough. Well, every borough may have site-specific objections to those marine transfer stations. Right now, those 5 marine transfer stations, one in each borough, can be in one ULURP application, certified as a whole, and the council is told vote it up or vote it down. So the council basically is not allowed to discuss site-specific objections or vote yes on Staten Island but no in the Bronx. Council members can try to assert themselves and insert themselves, but there should be, where there is a citywide application with site-specific locations, not a citywide application for X, Y, and Z, but where there are already sites listed, every borough should have the right to have a ULURP application certified for that borough. Lastly, I do want to reiterate, I do not favor the public advocate having subpoena powers. I do not. I think it is going down a path we do not want to go. Public advocates, by their nature, are advocates. They are adversarial. Look at the history. Probably that's their job. But the council is the body with the oversight responsibility over agencies. The advocate is an advocate. And I do not think that we can possibly go down that road of having further subpoena power. If the public advocate has issues with getting information, by rights, that city council should be there for the advocate and the council should follow up. The advocate already has a right to introduce legislation through the council. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to comment on a few specific proposals, since I did not do that before. I think, first of all, on the CCRB, I would also be interested in meeting with the advocates and understanding the proposal more. I have real concerns about an elected CCRB, whether or not it's legally feasible, just from the perspective of a concern that we can't really, there's a very high likelihood that non-progressive forces who do not have interest in police accountability and oversight would put every dollar resource they have into winning those elections, and it would actually undermine our goals for additional police oversight as opposed to add to them. So that's a conversation I'd love to understand how that, how the advocates for the proposal are thinking that through. I think on the planning side, I appreciated in the report the suggestion that, to figure out the 10 various reports, I think, that are required now by city government that really aren't related to one another. I think a really good job of this commission would be to rationalize the planning processes that already exist in the city and make them more understandable, more accessible, and therefore more effective. I do not think that we should be proposing a broad-based comprehensive planning system beyond that kind of rationalization, because I could not, over the course of the public hearings and the expert hearings, I've yet to understand how one balances the various contradictory needs that exist within planning through a comprehensive planning system. On one hand, we want more community engagement, more involvement from local neighborhood leadership. And on the other hand, we have very serious fair share goals and the need to cite less than favorable solid waste management, waste management facilities, or in some neighbors, homeless shelters are, unpopular, or municipal jails, and how you maintain that balance of requiring fair share citywide in a comprehensive plan, but also giving people local engagement and involvement is, I just can't wrap my head around it, and I don't think we have enough time to figure out a system that doesn't potentially do more harm. And then lastly, I would be remiss not to mention the chief diversity officer. I was unclear in this proposal whether, in what the staff drafted, whether the suggestion is to have a separate deputy mayor or whether it could be an administration has one of the various deputy mayors take on the portfolio of chief diversity officer, which I think could potentially undermine the goal of putting it in the charter to begin with. And I would like to see the idea of the CDO requirement in each agency.
Okay, and I will have staff talk to you more about that. So I am not speaking as chair now, but just as one individual member who happens to sit on this commission. I was in city government in 1989, and some of you may know, prior to that point, I sat on the Board of Estimate. The 1989 commission made decisions, much as we are being asked to do, not objectively completely, but politically also. When the Supreme Court made a decision that the voting structure of the Board of Estimate was illegal, it was not required that the Board of Estimate be eliminated. That was a political decision that was made, and a decision that went along with that was then where to put the power that the Board of Estimate had previously exercised, and that was, in many ways, a balance of power and the structure of New York City government. Personally, I think it's fair to look at the balance of government, again, now that we're 30 years later in the process, and now that we've had changes that weren't anticipated in 1989, including, but not limited to, term limits and how that affects the balance of power. So while I know some of you may not agree with that, that is something that I find to be both important and something that a guise through which I look at things is 89 got many things right, but it did make a strong mayor an even stronger mayor because most of the power that the Board of Estimate had exercised did go to the mayor. Does that work well for everyone? And if it doesn't, are there tweaks that we can make? I'm not holding out for that everything that was done was wrong. I don't think it was. I think New York City is a well-run big city. But I am looking at all of those things. So that's just my personal orientation to the task at hand. I would also say, as I said, in '89, which everybody who came before us in the expert hearing talked about as the kind of sine qua non of charter revisions, there were many, many, many parts of the questions. I think that a big part of whatever we do is going to be education of the voters, education of the elected officials, outreach to all of them about what it is, whether there are 3 questions or 20 questions. I think that that's going to be an important part of our jobs going into the next number of months. Anyone else? If not, is there a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.